Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today for this Turnitin webinar. My name is Julie Ullo-Medeiros, and I am a Member Relations Manager at the Connecticut Library Consortium. As many of you know, CLC is a statewide nonprofit that serves over 800 member libraries. One of the main ways that we serve you is by negotiating discounts on library products and services. That of course, includes Turnitin, which is one of our most popular discounts for schools. Over the last several years, Turnitin has worked with CLC to bring you the very best discount available to Connecticut schools. At CLC, we don't just want you to be able to buy something at a discount, but we really want to make sure that you're satisfied and successful with your subscription. As you know, Turnitin's reputation is as a leading tool for originality checking. Today, you will also see how it does more than prevent plagiarism by learning about using Turnitin for source credibility. Today is also a great opportunity to ask any questions you have about the software. If you have any questions about pricing, you can contact me afterwards. In a moment, we're going to hear from Susan Tyler, who will be leading this training session. But first, a big thank you to Turnitin for making this training opportunity possible for CLC members. With that said, I'm going to turn things over to our Turnitin expert, Susan Tyler, so she can dive right into the training. Thanks again for joining us, and let's get started.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I am Susan Tyler. I am down the I-95 from you guys. I'm down in Richmond, Virginia. So hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining today. My hope is that this is a little bit interactive. You all know very well that when you're delivering things online, oftentimes when you hear those crickets, it can get a little, so I would really appreciate it if you would participate in today's session. So feel free to take yourself off of mute. You can use the chat. I'm going to be tossing some questions out at you. And I do ask one thing, my main rule of thumb, I did steal this from TSA. If you see something, say something. So if you see something of interest, go ahead and say something. And in this opportunity here, I do not consider it as disrespectful if you interrupt me. If I'm talking, please, if something is on your mind, interrupt me. I do not consider that disrespectful in this environment. We want you to get the most out of this session for you. So today we're going to be talking about source credibility, and I'm just kind of curious, maybe in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just dropping in your role, if you are a librarian or an educator. I just kind of like to get to know my audience. If you'll just drop that in the Zoom chat. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background about me, I am a former educator. I taught in North Carolina. I taught primarily middle school was my jam, but I've taught at the collegiate level as well, part-time. And although they did seem rather similar on certain days. So we got the librarians in here. I've got high school, excellent. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of resources with you, but we're going to kind of talk about source credibility. So we want to just kind of begin with, what is this? Now, the information I'm presenting to you, I'm going to share out a lot of resources with you. Don't worry. But this session also, it's going to assist you when maybe you are having a lesson about this. I know my school librarian, Kelly, shout out to her. She did some incredible lessons with my scholars and really helped take it further. Also, these resources you can use with your staff, share them out, have these conversations about what is a credible source. So for our session overview, what is source credibility? What are our students missing? Authentic versus non-authentic sources, teachable moments, and then a ton of resources that is usually the icing on the cake. So to begin with the credible sources, well, with it, we want to define source credibility. So just kind of in thinking about source credibility and what it is, I would like you to, here we go. What I would like you to do is think about, how do you define it? Can your scholars define it? That's a tough one. Can they define what a credible source is? Do you think your scholars or the ones that you work with could even identify the differences between authentic and non-authentic sources? That can be tough too. You know, the old saying of, oh, if it's on the internet, it must be true. Oh, we cringe at that, don't we? And also, do you feel comfortable teaching about source credibility or even presenting this content to staff or students? So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So if you don't mind, either unmute and pipe up or drop something in the chat. I would really appreciate some participation right now.
I think with our freshmen and our sophomores, we aim for, do you know who the author is? And do you know what education experience or background makes them an authority?
Yes.
But I would love to move beyond that. And
Oh,
we never get farther. That's as far as we ever get, it seems.
this is the perfect session for you because I'm going to talk about 6 different facets and one of them is author, but you're going to get 5 more. So thank you for participating, Jennifer. Anybody else? Thoughts on any of these questions? Comfort level? Anyone?
We talk about who and why, and up through, I mean, I work with a lot of seniors doing their capstone project, and we get toward like peer-reviewed journals and what is peer-reviewed and why do we care and who are the peers and what are they doing. So.
Exactly. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So next, how much do you know? So these are some sample questions that will be made available to you with additional resources. So you could use them in your classroom, in your library, in your environment. But I like to kind of give you all an idea as to what they are so you can kind of experience it. So I'm not going to really, sometimes I put people on the spot and I ask them to put it in the chat, but I want you to just kind of stop and think what should be considered to help determine if a source is scholarly, if it's been peer reviewed, if it's published in a journal, if it's supported by evidence, or all of the above. And again, these are some sample questions that we have in an assessment that you can share with your scholars to start these conversations. Now, I know y'all know the answer to this one. I know you know it's D. So here, so of course it is all of the above, but sometimes our scholars take a quick look and they're like, peer reviewed, I don't know about that. Published in a journal, that sounds okay. Supported by evidence, oh yeah, definitely. So these are some kind of conversation starters that you can have. How about trying to figure out why the information was written? Does this even matter? Does this even matter if it's a credible source or not? And again, I know I've got my academically gifted group and especially librarians and teachers, you all know these, but this one again is true, but we need to have our scholars understand the importance of why it was even written. Was it written for a bias purpose to persuade me of something? So why is it important to evaluate the credibility of sources? Well, credible sources will provide the support to produce high quality and convincing arguments, or it's only important if the source is current. How about unreliable sources will make arguments less persuasive? Well, again, these are those conversation starters which you can have with your scholars to kind of get them to start thinking about the importance of it. And then finally, does it even matter if a source is current or up to date at all? No. If the source is important, every source is important. No, the publishing date doesn't interfere. Yes, with some exceptions to important pieces of writing, or none of the above. And, does it matter if it is up to date or not? Yeah, with some exceptions, of course. I'm not going to go up against and say something like the Declaration of Independence is way too old, so I'm not going to use that. It's not a credible source. So we need to make sure that our scholars do understand the relevance of sources and, that there are outdated materials out there, as you know. So with that being said, I usually ask people to define source credibility. And so I think I'm going to go ahead and ask you all, does anybody want to kind of define what you feel what source credibility is? No quick Googling now. Okay. This is an on the spot kind of question. Anybody want to just kind of give your definition of what you feel a credible source is or what source credibility is? Oh, come on.
I want to know that the information is accurate, current, and the purpose of it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So this is from the APA, the American Psychological Association, and they say that it's a characteristic denoting the extent to which the source of a persuasive message is seen as likely to provide accurate information, which is determined by expertise and trustworthiness. And I do tend to agree with this definition. There are many of them out there. But the one thing that I want us to kind of take from this is that source credibility can be taught. However, we need to join together across all subject areas to teach it. This is not just the English teacher's responsibility. This is not just the librarian's responsibility. This needs to come across in all subject areas. And I'm going to do my best to share with you and show you how we can take it further outside of the library, outside of one classroom to take that further. But do you all tend to agree with this definition? For the most part, yeah. That accurate information, expertise, trustworthiness. So I want us just to kind of start out with a quick video. Now, this is a resource. I'm going to quit sharing my screen just for a split second to pop in that video. We do have a lot of resources that are available for you. And one of them, we have a video series, and I'm just going to kind of open our session up a little bit by sharing the video with you. Now, again, I am going to be sharing all of these resources with you. So I'm just going to kind of play the video. It's quick, but I want you to think about how you could use this video in your setting. And it's just kind of the rationale. It's an introductory video for our scholars to kind of catch on to what we're talking about.
In today's world, there's a great deal of information that's easily accessed online or through books. Determining the credibility of these sources can prove to be challenging. Questions may arise like, can I trust this source? Is the author qualified? What's the purpose of the source? And how can I tell if it's credible or not? Therefore, it's important to learn skills and a process for evaluating the credibility of sources. Using credible sources in writing will provide the support to produce high quality and convincing arguments. On the other hand, using non-credible sources could harm claims and negatively impact your writing. In an effort to help develop this skill set, the educators at Turnitin produced several resources, such as a guide, lessons, and activities for evaluating source credibility. The Source Credibility Guide lays out 6 clear steps for evaluating the credibility of any source. It's meant to offer a process for navigating the murky waters of source credibility. Let's take a peek at the guide. Each step presents a category to be evaluated. Although it's suggested to follow the process in order, it's not necessary, as we all know every assignment has different requirements. The process begins with evaluating the origin of the source, then moves to the author, then purpose, perspective, academic, and finally, relevance. Each lesson presents a series of questions writers should ask themselves while evaluating a source. In turn, a process of asking the right questions and making informed choices around the quality of sources is established. A great way to practice this skill is by choosing a source and analyzing it at each step. Go ahead and give it a try. Select a source and take a look at the guide. Ask yourself the proposed questions for each category to decide how that source ranks in credibility. The video lessons can help explain the categories in detail, but the guide can always be used as a reference at any time. Learn more about the process by starting with Lesson 1 to discover what it means to evaluate the origin of a source.
So I hope that kind of gave you just a sneak peek of one of the many resources that you have. And I hope also that you feel like I feel this is made by our teaching and learning team, which is phenomenal. And it's a great just kind of way to introduce the concept to our scholars, just short and to the point. But also, what are our scholars missing? This is a loaded question here. This is a big one. So, why do our scholars struggle with identifying credible and authentic sources? Can you determine where that gap is? It's so easy to just say, well, they didn't learn it last year. You can't keep blaming it on the teachers before, well, they must have missed that day on that Zoom lesson. Why does this gap exist in here? And what can we do about it? Any thoughts on this? Any thoughts on why our scholars struggle with this credibility piece?
It's only one piece of a single Common Core standard. So when you're teaching standards,
bet.
it's not big enough to register, so it gets skipped over.
I agree with that, and it's hard to find the time and the resources to kind of pull it into those lessons. Anyone else? Do you know where that gap is? Is it elementary, middle, high? Is it all of the above? Why do you think this gap exists? And anything we could do about it as well. Any other thoughts or opinions on this? I'm curious.
I think being at the high school level, the assumption by our high school teachers is that they learn it in middle school.
Yes.
And or they're the technology generation. So they already know and understand how all of this happens. And so I think at all levels, we're constantly fighting that. And then I think, it really needs to be done on such a step-by-step basis, starting right in the beginning, but getting really serious about it starting in middle school through high school. But I also think there are a lot of teachers that don't hold kids accountable for it either. So if kids have the option between Googling an answer and actually having to go through those steps, they're just going to Google the answer unless a teacher holds them accountable.
Wow, that was a very powerful answer. And I 100%
There's a lot in there. I'm sorry.
No, I 100% agree with you. And like I said, it's so easy to say, well, last year they should have taught it before and things like that. But, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm old enough. I was around before the internet, and it is so easy. They feel that they have all of this information at their fingertips, but again, just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true, and one of my biggest gripes is when a student uses Wikipedia, and I'm like, just because it ends in pedia does not mean it's an encyclopedia or a credible source, and having that understanding. So thank you for sharing. So with that being said, this is an older study, but I found these statistics are really interesting. And I think that the numbers are higher. This was by Pew Research back and published in 2019. Roughly half of 18 to 29-year-olds, so about 48%, say they go online almost constantly, and 46% online multiple times per day. I think with our phones and technology, it's so easy and I even made the comment, don't Google the answer, it's just always out there. But by comparison, only 7% of those 65 and older typically go online almost constantly, and 35 multiple times, per day. So, we are living in that day and age where our students are constantly, online. And again, I really do think that this is much higher even so. But, what are students missing? This is one of my absolute favorite things because it, to me, is spot on. It's a quote from an instructor, and they said, students don't know how the search engine works or makes money. They don't even realize that search engines, they've got to make money. They've got to have ads. They've got to pay for it. And they usually can't judge a site's credibility even while using it. My favorite example was a site that looked good according to the students. But when I hit the Who We Are tab, a cat lying on a computer keypad greeted us. So the students thought this was a very credible source. And then they're like, not so sure about that one. So, we need to kind of teach our scholars about the differences between authentic and non-authentic sources. So how are we going to do this? Now, I'm going to toss out some statistics, and I'll tell you, it is very hard to find recent studies about this. It is very hard. And so this is an older study that Stanford did, roughly 8,000 students across middle school, high school, and college. And I found this to be extremely fascinating. Just a guess, what do you think? What percentage of middle school students back then, identified sponsored content as authentic news? What do you think? What percentage do you think? Any ideas? Any guesses?
90%.
80. And so I do think because this is
I was gonna say 80, and then I was like, no, it's not high enough.
But you know what? This is an older study, so I would be willing to bet it is higher. I'd be willing to bet it is higher now. How about that percentage of high school students that rated a fake photo as strong evidence? And these are some interesting questions that you could use in polling your scholars, and they might be surprised. You might be surprised, and they might as well. How about 40%? Again, I think that might be even higher, looking at a fake photograph as strong evidence. What percentage of students at any level question the source of it? Wow. And then the percentage of students at any level questioned the source of polling data. Ouch.
10%. Oh,
So these are just, in stopping to think, we know that we need to teach our scholars about this. So how can I help? How can we help at Turnitin? So let's take this and turn this into teachable moments for you. Now, I am very big on, this is not just for English teachers and librarians to teach. Yes, you do. I get it. But this is for all instructors to teach. So in thinking about this, the science teacher, the social studies teacher, the elective teachers, the health and PE teachers. And typically I ask groups of teachers, if you're not an English teacher, what resources would you need? Because a lot of times people are scared to teach something because they say, I'm not trained in that. I don't know how to teach it. But if I said to you, if I had maybe a biology teacher or an earth science teacher, and I said, I need you to teach a mini lesson on one aspect of source credibility, what would you need? What are some things that you think would be helpful for them to have to be able to just kind of teach? Anybody?
They would want to know, teachers teaching this for the first time want a checklist.
They do. Exactly. And they want those resources. A PowerPoint with notes that they can practically read if they need to. Assessments, videos, handouts. So we're going to break it down, and our materials are really broken down into, here we go. This wrong slide. Here we go. Teachable moments. So we can and need our students, our scholars to think critically about the sources. So we're going to break it down into 6 different facets. Who is the publisher? Meaning, what is the origin of the source? Wikipedia, sorry, you're not going to hack it. What do we know about the author? And that is something that I believe Jennifer brought up earlier. What do we know about the author, though? Are they a credible author or not? Is it some kid in his, parents' basement just writing a blog on their personal opinions? Or is it someone who's performed research about that topic? Is the intended purpose to persuade or inform? This is a big one. Social studies teachers easily can cover this topic. Does the author have a known bias? Especially think around election time. Is the source supported by evidence? Remember going back to that definition about the being able to support it with true evidence. And then how relevant or current is that information with the relevance here? So it's broken down into these different areas: origin, author, purpose, perspective, academic, and relevance. 6 different areas. Now, typically what I do is I ask teachers of all subject areas to pick one that they would feel comfortable in teaching. So perhaps the science department says I could do evidence, meaning academic sources. Social studies and government, we could cover bias. How about, to inform, maybe health and PE? The relevance of that information, perhaps an elective. Now, when I asked this question once to a school, the one that said origin, this one blew my mind, and it was brilliant. It was a foreign language teacher, and she said, I could teach the origin of a source because I teach about the origin of a culture and the origin of a language. I could teach that. Absolutely brilliant, right? if we had some resources to share with them. So I do promote kind of sharing the resources and having others assist with bringing these concepts to the attention of our scholars. So let's just kind of take a look when we're talking about origin. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you all know this, but I want you to see how we have kind of structured when we're speaking about origin. Imagine that foreign language teacher here. They could talk about where a source is retrieved, where it came from, but we need to make sure our scholars know the differences in these domains. These are very important, and even an EDU in there. You know, the print source, is it printed by a well-known publishing press? Now, our scholars may not know that, or university press or others, but there are some that kind of stick out, you know, the origin of a source. Also, thinking about major news outlets and things like that, they should be aware somewhat of some of these. And is it a primary or a secondary source? So keeping these things in mind with origin. Now, author, I know you all said that you've spoken, you've addressed this. Who is that author of that source? How qualified are they to even write on this topic? Again, is it the kid blogging or is it the scientist writing? This is one that I don't think our scholars think about sometimes. Is the author sponsored by an organization? I had a book on my coffee table once, and somebody was over at my house, and it's just like a funny book, just hysterical. And somebody flipped it over and they said, "You do know that this is sponsored by, you know, this organization." I was like, you know what? I really hadn't given it too much thought, but wow, you know, it kind of brought it back into my world. But we need to teach our scholars, you know, and this can promote bias. When we're looking at the purpose of source credibility, you know, what is the purpose of that source? Why was it written? But who is the intended audience? You know, your medical journals versus your newspaper articles. But thinking about down here, is it to inform, to entertain, to persuade, or even to sell? So these are, you know, some definite things that we need to have conversations around. With perspective, from what perspective was that source written? So what is that author's point of view? The tone or voice of the writing. I know I used to teach about tone and voice when I taught 7th grade ELA, but, you know, bring this tone or voice lesson into perspective and talk about it in regards to source credibility. When I was teaching about bias, a lot of teachers teach about this. Your social studies and government, they teach about these things. So is that writing biased or unbiased? And does there seem to even be an agenda? So keeping these things in mind when teaching about perspective. Academic, how scholarly is that source? And is the content even supported by evidence? You know, are there references? Does the author cite additional credible sources? We need to know these things. So keeping all of these things in mind, as well as, you know, is it even peer reviewed? Great conversation to, you know, have with your scholars about what it means to have a source that has been peer reviewed. And then finally, with relevance, how relevant is that source? You know, again, if I'm going to be quoting the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't just published last week. So we can't always go on that date. However, you know, is it relevant? You bet it is. But when was it published? We need to have those conversations because we know that there are outdated sources and that honestly, I've said this for years. I can probably find you data that will tell you whatever you want to hear because there's so much out there. But we need to determine if it's credible with that relevance. So how current is it? And was it even last updated? I've had students that would use pieces of work, but they didn't realize that that article or that piece of research had been updated. So keeping that in mind. But also, does the source fit the needs of the assignment? So does this assignment require an overview or just something specific? And does it require those primary sources? So with all of this being said, what we're going to do next is I'm going to start sharing a lot of the resources that we have for you. Now, we do have a rubric trait, which I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you as in here, but I like to kind of open with this. This is a rubric trait that teachers already have built into their Turnitin Feedback Studio product that they can add as a trait to any rubric. So this is a great way for us to promote this on all different types of assignments and getting our scholars to stop and think.
Susan, we can't hear you.
There, just for a second. All right, we're back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, it dropped out. So this is our rubric trait. Oh, let me share my screen again. All right. Are you able to see my screen? Just double checking.
Yes.
Okay. So this is our rubric trait that any teacher can add to their any assignment. And again, it's really bringing that awareness to our scholars of, yes, they cited a source. Yes, they used something, but is it credible? And I think that this is key for our instructors across all subject areas to take a look at. So what I'm going to do, let me stop sharing just for a quick second. I am going to share some resources with you. I am going to drop this in the chat as well. All right. So I'm going to drop this link in the chat. We offer resources on source credibility. Now, when I say resources, you're thinking, oh, that's great, a poster, maybe that cute little video, that just one. Our teaching and learning team has spent a lot of time putting these together. And, you know, we want to prepare you all and give you the resources that you need to take it further. So the link that I dropped in the chat, I'll also be sharing it out with Julie to share out with everyone. I want to show you a few things. I always suggest on here, go down to the first one, and that is the educator guide. Start here with the educator guide. When you click on it, you can learn more and you can actually download it. So I want to just start here and open this up and share this. So when we think about taking it further in here, this is the table of contents. We've got the about what it is, but we've got a lot in here. So we've got different ways to differentiate this content to those additional resources, but also how to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and keep on scrolling. This is where you're going to want to go. So what I did was I opened that link. I scrolled on down to the planning resources and I opened the source credibility educator guide. Look at all of these resources that you just click on and download. You've got a self-assessment, those multiple choice questions that I asked you earlier, right here. How about an open-ended self-assessment? Well, here's the first one, the multiple choice that I gave you. So we've got the questions all written out in here, different questions for you to be able to, you know, ask your scholars. But if you would prefer that open-ended one, of course, you can go there and download that. When you click on the link, it will open it up. You just click that download and it will take you there. So, you know, I like to always start with an assessment to get an idea of where we are, where our scholars are. We do have quick mark sets, which are drag and drop comments. These are typically already built in for your instructors. They're usually already built in for them and ready to go. We have a performance assessment and that rubric trait that I showed you. But this is where it gets good. We've got class presentations in here. Now notice that it's all broken down by those 6 facets that I mentioned before: origin, author, purpose, perspective, academic, and relevance. So go back to what I said about having different subject areas, each choose one that they might feel comfortable with and introducing the concept. Then you can take it even further. So let them, you could do a general introduction, maybe with that assessment, have different subject areas, select one area as a team that they might feel comfortable using. So for example, let me show you. Here is a PowerPoint lesson that's ready to go. I do like to show that we've got notes on it in here, recommendations. It's got the goal, the materials, everything they need about how to talk about. This one is on purpose. It's got the links. It's got the educator notes in here down at the bottom. Highlight the audience section. Oh, sorry, this one's on audience. So, so it has all of the notes. Model, ask each question aloud and show the students how you might find the answer to that question. Example, who is the intended audience for this? So they have all of these resources. Student practice, instruct students to walk through the same steps for their source. Give them time to complete their work. So we're talking about intention here. And again, all of these resources, all of these PowerPoints have these notes to make it so much easier. If I was a science teacher, I would feel much better knowing I kind of had my cheat sheet down here. And again, it's going to walk them through. Of course, they're going to want to review this information first to feel comfortable modeling, ask each question aloud and show students how you would find the answer. But again, it's giving them those examples. And then the conclusion in here. It also offers in the notes down here, extended independent practice, how they can take it further. So it offers, you've got that as a resource. I want to go back to, hang on just a quick second. I lost my page that I needed. I've got so many different tabs open, so give me a minute. Let me go back to my guide and share my screen again. So back in that educator guide, those are some of the class presentations that we have available, again, broken down. I'll come back and I'll show you that scaffolded lesson as well, and that as well. There are worksheets for each of these as well. We also have posters. So here is a source credibility guide. This is a poster. We have posters and handouts that can be easily downloaded and shared. This is an excellent, just kind of all to the point reference sheet right here that I feel our scholars should keep on their desktop, honestly, right here. So how do I know if it is a credible source? I need to remember to look at the origin, author, purpose, relevance, purpose, and perspective, but it gives them those questions along the way as a reminder to check it. So keep that in mind as one of the resources. We also have in here, so further down, we've got graphic and visual aids. There are the handouts that we have in here and videos. Note that there is a video for each one. You all watched the introductory one, but there is a short video for each one as well. So if the social studies teacher, or maybe the elective teacher, the business or the art teacher is going to be talking about this, or your foreign language teacher, maybe if they didn't feel comfortable teaching the lesson, have them at least show the short video and introduce it. Then perhaps you can swoop in, follow up with that lesson. So we have all of these in here available for you in the instructor guide. So we've got the videos right here. That was that introductory lesson that I showed you, that video. Here's a practice handout. Notice that they have everything. It's written out. This is lesson 2, all about author. And your scholars can come in here, download it, and type in here, but it's all outlined for you. What are your initial thoughts on this? Any comments or thoughts about this so far? The educator guide and having these resources for you? And I know a few people had to step out. do you feel more comfortable having these resources to share and kind of sharing them with others to assist you with teaching these concepts? Yes, maybe. Well, further down in our educator guide, we have standards aligned for them as well. We can see that they are definitely aligned. We didn't just throw this together. It also has the suggested time in here. And, to complete the unit, it can be spread out over 2 to 3 weeks. However, if you need to do it faster, that's fine. The tips for implementation, these can be key. So if perhaps maybe that foreign language teacher is going to maybe give that self-assessment, just make sure you share some of these with them, just as an FYI. This can be rather helpful to them. And so it's going to outline each of those. Also, how do we take this even further? And also, how do we modify it? I taught regular ed and special education, and I fully understand how we have to modify and extend lessons and things like that. So, how about modifications that help students who may need more support? How about doing those pairs or groups and only focus on one of those factors, or performing this activity in preparation for an upcoming writing assignment kind of together, or split students into pairs and groups? And then further on down for them, they are using Turnitin, Feedback Studio. We've got the additional resources that they have. And then just a little bit about our team and some of the additional resources that we have in here. So again, I highly suggest starting with the educator guide and going down to those links. I do want to just kind of show you briefly the scaffolded lesson. So I did just show you that one. Hang on. This is the scaffolded lesson PowerPoint, and it's got station guides. So we've got the source credibility guide, but it's kind of broken down even more in here. So you've got your print source, you've got your author in here. So again, all of these resources are free for you on this site, but also we're doing our best to make it relevant for you to be able to present it back to those scholars in here. So that is just an overview of those resources. So let's go back one more place. But what are your thoughts on that? Thoughts, questions? You like what you see? I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts. Any comments? So here are the resources that you've got. I put that link. Now, what I usually do also is I typically have, people jump in, and I give everybody a few minutes, jump in there, start really looking at the resources. And what I typically do is I ask you all, so what are your next steps? And also I ask instructors to, share what they really liked in there. So kind of to sum up, I want you to think about creating a plan of how to teach source credibility and or share these resources. Collaborate with others. This is not just solely one person's responsibility. Consider modeling those scenarios as well. Make it a game. Have an online credible source hunt, in teaching and sharing this, and then apply the resources from this pack. So I hope that this has given you all additional information, more pieces in your arsenal to be able to share to have these resources. And again, I've included the pack, that link in the chat for you. And it's time for you all to just kind of jump in and start going through the resources. And because there's so few of us, I usually have everybody just jump into those resources and open them up and start sharing a few of how they would use them in the classroom or who they could see using them in the classroom and taking it further. But since we've got a little bit of a small group, well, we can wait on that. So. That's pretty much all I have for you all, but I want to see, are there any additional questions, any thoughts? Has anybody jumped into that link yet? Open that resource guide, that educator resource guide. Right. And I know we've kind of dwindled. People had to leave to pick up kiddos and to join as they had other things. But again, I hope you found that this is making you feel more comfortable with addressing the topic of source credibility. It can be overwhelming, but B, in sharing that with others. Again, as a librarian or as an educator, it's not just my responsibility to teach this. I hope you're seeing how bring in that foreign language teacher. They could show that origin video. It's super short. They introduce origin of a source, just that introduction. Someone else can teach that lesson with that lesson plan, with that PowerPoint, with those handouts, and then taking it further. And, asking social studies, elective, health and PE, they're all going to be citing sources. So let's do our best to give our scholars the knowledge of how to determine if it's credible or not. Okay. That's all I've got for you, Julie. Any other additional questions from those who are still left in the room, or from you, Julie?
Well, I'm like wowed by all of this. And I love the fact of laying out a plan on how to spread the responsibility beyond school librarians and English teachers. And
100%.
yeah.
And like I said, when that foreign language teacher said that, that blew my mind. I mean, I nearly fell out of my chair. I was like, that is absolutely brilliant. She's like, well, I teach the origin of a culture and of a language, so I'll teach the origin of a source. What? I mean, if the Spanish teacher can teach source credibility,
yeah.
And so again, I think with the 6 different facets that we have, how it is broken down into those 6 different traits, looking at the 6 different traits, let me go back to them. With these, I think when you present to a staff, which one, I need each department, pick 2. And then you're going to get comfortable, and then we'll assign you 1. Pick 2, a first and a second place. What do you feel comfortable if I gave you the resources? And then you have the resources to share with them. All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you all attending, and you do have this recording and that link. And Julie, I will email you also the link with additional, the resources and things like that in how you can use this in the classroom.
Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, and have a great afternoon.